And so, Mr. Chairman and colleagues, I urge all of my colleagues to vote against the fiscal year 2012 Interior and Environmental Appropriations Bill and any anti-environment and anti-public health and anti-American amendments that may be offered. I thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman from the Virgin Islands yields back her time. What purpose does the gentleman from Georgia rise? The gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to this bill, which guts long-standing environmental policy. Unfortunately, this is not the only thing that's wrong with America today. Once again, Speaker Boehner and the GOP are putting the needs of a few right-wing members of Congress ahead of ordinary, hard-working, everyday Americans, many of whom lit up the phone lines yesterday in record numbers to express their disgust with Republican intransigence that's holding our nation and international markets hostage. Not only did they call in record numbers, but 50 to 60 people came to my district office yesterday to show their support for a balanced approach to solving this debt ceiling issue. I also received a petition with over 1,500 names begging that we protect Social Security. But still, against the urgent pleas of international financial institutions, Wall Street executives, millions of Americans who can ill afford any reduction in their ability to borrow or an increase in interest rates for a car, home, or student loan, Republicans continue to show contempt for the American people by saying no to increasing the debt ceiling. Do you realize out there how many of us have adjustable rate mortgages on our primary residence? Can you imagine what will happen if this nation defaults on its obligations to pay its debt, and as a result interest rates go up? That means your adjustable rate mortgage, my adjustable rate mortgage rate goes up. Could I stand to pay $1,000 extra or $2,000 extra per month on my mortgage because interest rates went up, because we didn't do what we should have done here, which is to increase the debt ceiling, something we've done 21 times, I believe, over the last in excess, we did 18 times with Ronald Reagan as president. But we can't afford not to deal with this debt ceiling issue. Mr. Chairman, the Washington Post reports that House Republicans watched a movie together about bank robbers to motivate members of their caucus to stand firm in their solidarity against raising the debt ceiling. What kind of example does this set for the American people? What would they say if they knew that there's a concerted effort by Republicans not only to prevent an increase in the debt ceiling, but to impede economic progress, slow or stop job creation, cause the loss of 700,000 jobs with the passage of cut, cap, and kill? But what about our seniors, our veterans, our students? What about our credit rating in this country? Well, Mr. Chairman, just like bank robbers, it appears that Republicans seek to threaten society as a whole, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. Republicans have now taken hostage of the U.S. economy, threatening the livelihoods and well-being of Americans, young and old, rich and poor. They can see the hands of the clock ticking. Precious seconds, minutes, and hours wasted. Speaker Boehner and his cohorts say no to the President's request for reasonable compromise, no to the desperate pleas of businesses begging for a sense of certainty about the debt ceiling, and no to the American people who have shouted at the top of their lungs for shared sacrifice in these budget negotiations. Well, Mr. Speaker, if Republicans are looking for some additional inspiration in the debt ceiling negotiations, I'd recommend that they watch Saving Private Ryan. It's about a man who makes the ultimate sacrifice to save the lives of his fellow Americans. He was not a survival of the fittest type guy.
Gentleman's time has expired.
You on your own. We
Gentleman's
were all
time
in
has
this
expired.
together. And with that, Mr. Speaker,
Gentleman's time has
I
expired.
yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. What purpose does the gentleman from New York rise?
Mr. Speaker, I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this country is in the middle of a great crisis, entirely an artificial crisis, created by an attempt by one political party to blackmail the entire country into adopting its program of destroying Medicare and Social Security and food stamps and unemployment and all the things that many of our people depend on. But why do I say it's an artificial crisis? Because the debt ceiling increase is something we normally do, 7 times during President Bush's administration. Some people think that to raise the debt ceiling is to say we're going to borrow and spend more. No, it's not. You raise the debt ceiling in order to pay for bills you already incurred because of decisions made 2 and 3 and 5 years ago, mostly during the Bush administration. Not to raise the debt ceiling is like going into an expensive restaurant, having an expensive meal, and then getting the bill and saying, oh my God, I've got too much money on my credit card, I don't think I'll pay the bill. Well, if that's the case, you shouldn't have had the meal. If you don't want to pay the bill, you shouldn't have made those budget decisions. You shouldn't have cut those taxes 10 years ago and gotten into those wars 7 and 8 years ago and made the other decisions that piled up the deficit. If you want to have a debate, which we should, on how to change our policies in the future, that's for the budget debate. We're going to pass a budget at some point. We ought to debate tax levels, expenditure levels. But instead, what are they doing? They're saying, that's a nice economy you got there. Pity if something should happen to it. And if you don't do exactly what we want, we're going to destroy it by not raising the debt ceiling and causing a collapse in credit so that everybody's interest rates go up and that people have to pay $1,000 more a month on their mortgage or whatever, because this will ripple right throughout the economy. A default will be a real crisis for the economy and will cost everybody. It will cost the economy probably $1 trillion in extra deficit spending over the next 10 years just in higher interest costs. But if we don't do exactly what they want to destroy Medicare and Social Security and the other things they've never liked in the first place, they will wreck the economy by not raising the debt ceiling in order not to pay the bills that they incurred. Then we hear that we have a deficit crisis, that after all, the country is broke. The country's broke. We've got to cut the budget. Even the President says the country's broke. We've got to cut the budget. A little less savagely, but we still got to cut. Wrong. The country is not broke. It's just that we are not taxing the millionaires and the billionaires and the big corporations the way we used to. In 1950, the corporations paid 6% of the entire economy, of the GDP, in corporate taxes. Today it's under 1%. 20 years ago, 30% of all income taxes came from corporations. Today it's under 6%, and that's why the middle class feels overtaxed, because they are. Because we don't tax the millionaires and the billionaires the way we used to. We don't tax the corporations the way we used to. The big multinationals I'm talking about, not the small businesses. Instead, we've shifted the tax burden to the middle class, and we don't get enough tax revenue. And the fact of the matter is that if you look at the budget of 2001, and if you look at the budget of 2011, in 2001 the budget was $258 billion in surplus. It was the last Clinton budget. How has it changed? How has it changed? Why is this budget $1.2 trillion in deficit? That was $250 billion in balance. What's changed? Well, adjusted for inflation and for population growth, Non-defense discretionary spending, everything they want to cut now, hasn't changed at all. $369 billion then, $369 billion now. What's changed? Well, defense spending and Homeland Security spending has gone up 74% because of 2 wars and a lot of bloat. 74% increase in defense spending. Mandatory programs, that is to say Medicare, Social Security, veterans, up 32%. And that's not only those, it's also unemployment insurance, mostly because we're in a recession and you have to pay more you have to pay more unemployment insurance and food stamps and so forth. Total revenues down 24%. From a bigger country, we're getting 24% less revenue today. Why? Because in 2001, the tax is collected 20% of GDP, and today it's 14.5% of GDP. So what should we be doing? Well, first of all, we should raise the debt ceiling to recognize the debts that were already incurred, and we should do it cleanly so as not to throw the economy into a tailspin. Then we should debate all these issues in the budget. We should raise taxes on the millionaires, the billionaires, the corporations, cut defense, and not try to tamper with people's Social Security and Medicare and the things that they depend on. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Clerk will read.
Page 65, line 7, Environmental Programs and Management, $2,498,433,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2013.
Mr. Chairman.
What purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana rise?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Fleming of Louisiana, page 65, line 19, after the dollar amount, insert reduced by $48,206,000. Page 158, line 25, after the dollar amount, insert increased by $48,206,000.
Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, a little over a year ago, the GAO reported alarming findings of the Energy Star program, a joint EPA and DOE program designed to save American consumers money on their utility bills. Although well-intentioned, I have concerns that the Energy Star program is leveraging hard-earned tax dollars and the trust of the American people for a program that lacks oversight, could still be subject to fraud and abuse, and one that would be better administered by the private sector. Here is a report here in my hand. In March 2010, the report indicates that the GAO released its report documenting that the program was mainly a self-certification program without much oversight or accountability. In fact, according to the report, GAO reported created several fictitious companies without any relevant products on the market that easily became Energy Star manufacturing partners. This new status granted these groups unlimited access to Energy Star logos and promotional resources, and GAO was also able to obtain certification for 15 bogus products, including a gas-powered alarm clock and a room cleaner, which is incredulously a feather duster taped to a space heater. Prior to approving these items, EPA failed to review any additional materials, including websites and self-incriminating pictures. My amendment will simply reduce the environmental programs and management account within EPA by $48,206,000 with the intent of removing the EPA's portion of funding for the Energy Star program. The savings from my amendment would be added to the spending reduction account. Mr. Chairman, the Energy Star program created in 1992 enables companies and manufacturers to voluntarily label qualifying and EPA-approved household products and goods such as air conditioners, refrigerators, computers, light bulbs, etc. Energy Star also grants energy-efficient labeling for home improvements and businesses. Energy Star labeling encourages consumers to purchase such products and make home improvements in order to be more energy efficient, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and save money on utility bills. All very good value-oriented ideas and concepts. It is my belief that the federal program should not be paying anything for the Energy Star program, however. Rather, this program would be better served as a private entity, saving the taxpayer millions of dollars each year. There are several good examples of well-respected, well-run, independent private sector initiatives, including the Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, an internationally recognized green building certification system, Consumers Union, an expert independent nonprofit organization which publishes the widely acclaimed Consumer Reports, and Underwriters Laboratories, UL, a global independent safety science company offering expertise in 5 areas, including product safety and environment. These are just a few examples of non-government, non-taxpayer-funded entities that understand that if you don't do a good job, they will lose credibility. Not as much as can be said for the Energy Star program. Americans rely heavily on this program and look to purchase household products with the Energy Star label. Companies use the EPA-approved logo to market products. The federal government in several states offer tax credits to those who purchase Energy Star products, and federal agencies are required to use certain Energy Star-approved products. The Energy Star program continues to receive millions of dollars, including approximately $300 million through the American Recovery and Investment Act, the stimulus bill, and $48 million in the underlying legislation. It's time for the federal government to allow the private sector to take over and stop funding programs riddled with loopholes that investigators need to point out before the EPA institutes systematic changes. So in summary, Mr. Chairman, we could well afford to save $48 million, and we have plenty of good models where private entities have been doing a much better job for a much longer time. So I ask others to support this amendment. This is a good not only energy savings but money saving idea, and let's turn it over to the private sector. They do a much better job. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman from Louisiana yields back his time. What purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
I rise to claim opposition to the amendment.
Gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 5 minutes.
So, Mr. Chairman, this amendment would eliminate the Energy Star program, even though a great many American consumers rely on it to choose appliances that meet federal energy efficiency standards, such as windows, refrigerators, dishwashers, clothes washers. The program has improved since an Inspector General report highlighted flaws with the program. In response to the IG's report, Energy Star moved away from allowing manufacturers to self-certify that they comply with efficiency standards, and now it requires third-party certifiers. Well, I'm sure there's room left for further improvement in the program. As the gentleman from Louisiana has stated, many, many consumers have come to rely on this program in their everyday purchases and would frankly be stunned to think that this program is now being targeted. Americans, with the help of Energy Star, saved nearly $18 billion on their utility bills last year alone, and enough energy to avoid greenhouse gas emissions equivalent to those from 33 million cars. Isn't that a good thing? This is a voluntary program that works. We've heard so much railing coming particularly from the other side about EPA's regulations. And now the majority wants to attack a voluntary pro-consumer program. The underlying bill already contains a very substantial cut to the Energy Star program, notwithstanding the fact that it has saved hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, and has enabled consumers to be much better informed as to what their appliances might cost them in terms of energy requirements. But the Energy Star program has been funded in this bill at the 2008 level 4 years ago. Since then, the population has expanded. The number of appliances and things that, particularly computers that use a great deal of electricity, has expanded almost geometrically. People's bills are going up. They want to know what are the most energy efficient products. So they rely upon the Energy Star program. Again, a voluntary program, one that has been improved since the IG report. They had third-party certification now as to what they are saying, so that we should have some confidence now in what in the Energy Star imprimatur, if you will, on appliances. Just doesn't seem that this is the kind of thing that we should be cutting. This is a pro-consumer, voluntary effort that works. So I strongly oppose this amendment. I'd be happy to yield.
Yes, I don't disagree with the gentleman's comments. It's a good program, although it has been a flawed program. Hopefully it's been improved. My point is that this could be better done in the private sector, a fee or whatever paid directly to whatever private entity out there that would be nonprofit for this. Why should the taxpayers have to subsidize it? That's really the issue here.
Well, I would say to the gentleman reclaiming my time, we have things like the Better Business Bureau, which frankly don't have that kind of certification, which almost anybody can get designation. Sometimes it's helpful, other times it's less so. I think the American consumer wants some level of credibility in the organization that is certifying that an appliance is energy efficient, that the Energy Star designation means something. And if this was self-policing, done completely in the private sector, you wouldn't have had an Inspector General report. You wouldn't have had this corrective mechanism that now says, you've got to fix this. You can't rely upon self-certification, which is exactly what you'd have under the private sector. They said you've got to have a third-party certification.
Would the gentleman yield?
You wouldn't have had that. Yes, sir.
There are plenty of private sector oversight organizations, and again, UL, no appliance ever goes to market now without a UL stamp. And again, that's done through a private entity. So again, it's a great program. Don't get me wrong. I just don't see where taxpayers should be funding that. We can do much better through the
gentleman from Virginia's time has expired. What purpose does the gentleman from California
Mr. Chairman, I rise to talk to this amendment. I appreciate the gentleman's...
The gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I appreciate the gentleman's shared desire to reduce spending. However, I must oppose this amendment. As the minority pointed out, to meet the 2012 302B allocation, we cut the Energy Star program by $27.5 million. Funding for the Energy Star program down to $48.2 million, which is below the 2006 level. We believe that significant cuts took place in this program as they should have been taken, and with that, we reluctantly oppose the amendment. Would ask for a no vote on the amendment. Be happy to.
We agree with his position on this, and we oppose the amendment as well.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Gentleman from California. Does the gentleman from California yield back his time?
Yield back the balance of my time.
The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Fleming. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. What purpose does the gentleman from Kansas rise?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the table, number 39.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 39, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Mr. Pompeo of Kansas.
The gentleman from Kansas is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me begin by saying thank you to the committee chairman for running a great piece of legislation. I think this bill will go a long way towards creating a pro-growth economy. We've done a great deal of work to reduce spending on this bill, and I stand here this afternoon hoping to help out even just a little bit more. The amendment I offered during H.R. 1. It passed with votes from both sides of the aisle. The Senate failed to act on it, so I'm here today again to offer this amendment one more time, and I hope it will pass again with bipartisan support, and that we will once again move towards a smaller, more humble federal government that does only those things that it's intended to do. The amendment I offer today seeks to reduce by $6.2 million the amount of money available for the EPA's Greenhouse Gas Registry Program. If I had my druthers, I'd probably prefer to see the program go away. But I offer a more modest amendment today. This amendment only reduces spending for this program back to the levels from 2009. This is very consistent with the legislation that we're acting on, the bigger bill, which takes us back to 2009. This is a program that currently stands, without this amendment, 95% higher than the funding for the Greenhouse Gas Registry in 2009. I think we can all agree that we weren't spending too little money in 2009 regulating greenhouse gases in America. You know, we know this. The EPA says that this registry is just about data collection. We just like a little bit more information. But those of us in Kansas who are trying to operate businesses and make a go of it know that there's an agenda far beyond that. This is an agenda that is job killing. This is an agenda that will destroy jobs not only in Kansas, but will drive up the cost of energy for every American. And so I urge my colleagues today to support this amendment. If we simply restore funding back to the 2009 level, we will roll back, I hope again with bipartisan support, and we'll create jobs and keep EPA doing those things it ought to be doing. With that, I yield back my time.
The gentleman from Kansas yields back his time. Who seeks recognition? Gentleman from Virginia. What purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
I rise to claim time in opposition to the amendment, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes in opposition.
I do rise in opposition to this amendment because it attempts to strip half of the remaining funding for EPA's Greenhouse Gas Registry Program. This amendment is part of an effort to ignore what the scientists tell us is the most serious environmental problem of our time, climate change. Republicans have already passed a bill to repeal a scientific finding that greenhouse gases pose a danger to human health. The underlying bill we're considering says that no stationary source, no matter how large or how lethal to human health, should ever have to reduce its carbon pollution. But this amendment goes even further. It says that we should not even bother to find out how much pollution is being put into the air. I guess you could call it the ignorance is bliss amendment. What we should be doing is the opposite of what the gentleman is trying to do. The bill already makes a 30% cut to the registry program in order to cripple the efforts of EPA with regard to greenhouse gases. The Greenhouse Gas Reporting Program simply requires the I'll make all of my points, and then you can more efficiently address them if we have time.
Thank you.
Sir. The Greenhouse Gas Reporting Program simply requires the largest sources of carbon pollution, power plants, refineries, and the very largest factories, to tell EPA and the public how much they pollute. If we're ever going to deal responsibly with this pollution that is costing us billions in health care and shortening thousands of lives, we need to know where it is coming from and have some idea of how much is being emitted. This amendment is yet one more example of putting the profits of industry and particularly those industries who pollute the air and eventually clog the water, who poison much of our environment, to put their profits ahead of the public interest and the public's health. We all know that pollution is dangerous to our health. The scientists tell us that, certainly the reputable scientists. Let's allow EPA to fulfill its core responsibility, which is to collect this information and inform the public. I know our friends on the other side hate regulations because they believe that the Environmental Protection Agency doesn't understand the impact of those regulations on businesses and on the economy and on jobs and so on. EPA's job is to protect the public health. And in doing so and in encouraging cleaner sources of energy, we will not only protect the public's health, but we will grow this economy, grow it in a more competitive and healthier way. in a far more sustainable manner. I oppose this amendment vigorously, and at this point I would yield some time to the gentleman who offered the amendment.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for yielding. I'll be very brief. I certainly care deeply about clean air. So do all the businesses in Kansas. So do all the agriculture people. We want clean water, and we know how to do it, and we're doing it. You said this was the ignorance is bliss amendment. I would prefer to call it the jobs are a good thing amendment. And when things get mischaracterized, I'm not suggesting we abolish this. There's still $6.2 million available for the greenhouse gas registry. That's as much as was available in 2009. And this is a simple, modest amendment that many on your side voted for when I offered it before, and I hope many of them will continue to do that. I thank you for yielding the time.
Well, I was happy to yield. I'll reclaim my time. It just seems to me that more information, accurate information, should not be a threat. Isn't it appropriate to let the public know, in fact, to let lawmakers know who might need to respond, how lethal is the pollution? How substantial is the pollution? What's the composition of the pollution coming from the very largest polluters? What are we doing to our people? What are we doing to our environment? What are the sources of much of the billions of dollars that we're spending in health care? Twice as much as any other country spends on a per capita basis. So all we're trying to do here is to have a registry. Information that ought not be threatening. This amendment should be defeated. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman's time has expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the... What purpose does the gentleman from Washington rise?
I move to strike the requisite number of words.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
A few years ago, the Supreme Court said that EPA, under the Clean Air Act, had to come up with and look at the consequences of greenhouse gases and to create this registry, which is a scientific document that allows us to know just exactly what the various sources of these greenhouse gases are. Now, we hear a lot about climate change. I just want to point out there is another more immediate problem. The gentleman from Kansas may not be aware of this because it affects our oceans, and Kansas is in the middle of our country. The oceans are now a sink for carbon dioxide. And as we get more and more CO2 in the ocean, it creates acidity, the so-called pH factor, which at normal ranges around 8.1, and when it goes down, we have places in Hood Canal, my home area, that are down at 7.3. At that level of acidity, it starts to take apart coral, it takes apart oyster shells, it takes apart the phytoplankton, which are the food for salmon, 60% of the food for salmon. This is an incredibly important condition. So the more we can learn about greenhouse gases and what their effect is not only on our climate, but also on the ocean. And we are poisoning the ocean. And again, there's this, let's not take time to work on this issue because somehow it's going to cut away jobs. It may end civilization. Think about that. Your grandchildren, my grandchildren, your children maybe you're younger. I worry about them. I worry about what's going to happen if we don't deal with this climate change issue. And we should take this seriously. The best scientists in the world say this is something that needs to be dealt with. So again, I think this idea of taking out the money for the greenhouse gas registry so that we'll have a scientific underpinning to know what these problems are and how much various sources produce is the ignorance is bliss amendment. Let's defeat this amendment and let the EPA do their job. I yield back.
The gentleman from Washington yields back his time. Questions on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Pompeo. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Purpose of
Chairman.
the gentleman from Kansas rise.
Mr. Chairman, I request a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Pompeo, will be postponed. Clerk will read.
Page 66, line 1, Office of Inspector General, $41,099,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2013. Building and Facilities,
What purpose does the gentlewoman from
$36,428,000.
Mr. Chairman?
What purpose does the gentlewoman from California rise?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 23, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Ms. Richardson of California.
Gentlewoman from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to speak on the Richardson Amendment. This amendment adds an additional $5 million to the Diesel Emissions Reduction Act, also known as DERA grants, by cutting $10 million from the EPA Buildings and Facilities account. The Richardson Amendment is about creating jobs, saving lives, and improving our nation's air quality. Mr. Chairman, in the last Congress, I introduced legislation that extended DERA for 5 years. The DERA legislation received large bipartisan support and was later signed into law by President Obama. When you consider DERA, it is supported by a coalition of over 500 leading transportation, environmental, and health organizations. I represent a region that's home to the largest port complex in the nation and consists of some of the busiest freeways and railways in our country. However, the area also suffers from poor air quality, which has led to much higher rates of asthma and cancer than any other area in the nation. DERA improves our air quality by reducing the CO2 emissions by up to 35,600 tons per year. It has been estimated that nearly 2,000 lives will be saved over the next 5 years through DERA and its increase in support on our air quality. Unfortunately, the bill before us today reduces the funding for DERA grants by $19.9 million, which is well below the fiscal year 2011 levels. The EPA estimates the DERA program averages more than $13 in health and economic benefits for every $1 we authorize in funding. The EPA also estimates that DERA saves more than 3.2 million gallons of fuel annually, which means that truckers and other diesel operators will spend $8 million less on fuel. Mr. Speaker, that's less dependency on foreign oil. In these tight economic times, it makes sense that we invest in programs that work and are cost-effective. The CBO score on the Richardson Amendment showed that it will decrease the budget authority by $5 million without creating any new budget outlays. Simply put, the Richardson Amendment saves money. Since DERA funding began in 2007, more than 3,000 projects nationwide have benefited from this program. In fact, there have been 9 projects in the Los Angeles County area where I reside alone. Mr. Chairman, DERA projects have created jobs and improved air quality in my district and across the country. The Richardson Amendment saves lives, saves money, and creates jobs, which is certainly what we need and we should be talking about more in these dark hours. I urge my colleagues to support the Richardson Amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman from California may not reserve the balance of her time. Does the gentlewoman yield back?
Yes.
Yields back her time. What purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
Rise to oppose the amendment.
Gentleman is recognized in opposition for 5 minutes.
And I do this extremely reluctantly because I'm very supportive of the DERA program, but I can't support the offset. The DERA program, as the gentlelady is aware of, was set to be, it was not in the administration's mark. And in this underlying bill, we provide for $10 million for the DERA program. As she well knows, throughout the country, this is a way to remove old diesel engines that pollute, and this is something that actually works. It's not a program, it's not a study, it's not some academic exercise. It's actually something that cleans up the air, so something I'm very much supportive of. But right now, EPA's buildings and facilities accounts are cut by nearly a third. We have cut back these accounts substantially, and so we just can't support the offset in the bill.
Would the gentleman yield?
I'd be happy to yield.
I thank the gentleman from California, of which we both serve. And it's my understanding that the account that the funds were requesting that it would be taken from with what we're taking still meets its outlay that's required. So I don't believe that this would be a hurt to that account.
Reclaiming my time, the program has already taken a substantial hit, a $1 million hit, as a matter of fact. Almost every other program in our bill has taken substantial hits. We're serious about reducing spending. If we had the additional money, I'm sure the chairman would have added more money in the DERA account in the first place if we had the extra money to do so, because I think it's an extremely successful program, something I certainly support. So I understand the gentle lady's conviction, but we just don't have the money to take care of this offset. So we have to oppose the amendment.
Does the gentleman yield back his time?
I yield back.
The gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
I rise to strike the last word.
The gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with the distinguished member from California. I know my colleague, and she's more than a colleague, a good friend, is very passionate about this program. And it has a sweet acronym, DERA. But as I said during H.R. 1 debate, the diesel emissions program is a good program. That's not the issue. Right now, with regard to this amendment, the issue is whether or not we should be raiding other EPA accounts to give this diesel program even more funding than it actually has already gotten in this bill. Chairman Simpson funded the diesel program at $30 million, even though President Obama requested nothing for it. Now, this amendment would add a mere $5 million, but it would take $10 million from EPA's buildings to pay for it. It may be politically attractive to take from a buildings account until you know what it funds. The following facilities would have to give up funding to add this $5 million to the diesel program. The Ann Arbor, Michigan National Vehicle and Fuel Emissions Lab, the Andrew Breidenbach Environmental Research Center in Cincinnati, Ohio, the Region 9 office in San Francisco, the Research Triangle Park Main Laboratory in North Carolina. And in that regard, the project in 2012 needs to be funded so we can save future lease costs that would be in jeopardy if we were to take this money away from the Research Triangle Park Lab. The Narragansett, Rhode Island Research Lab would be cut. The Air and Radiation Lab in Montgomery, Alabama. All of these facilities have requests in this fiscal year 2012 budget for needed facilities improvements. To cut those in order to increase a program that was already plussed up $30 million above the request doesn't seem to me to be the right thing to do. In addition, we have an amendment filed from another member, and I see her here, so I suspect it's going to come up right now, to take away the $30 million that's already in the bill. I would hope my good friend would stick around to strike the last word and address this amendment that would zero out the diesel program. I don't want to zero it out, but neither do I want to zero out money for 6 important EPA facilities. So I hope the supporters of the diesel program will stick around, will defend it against its elimination, which is an amendment that's coming up very soon. But right now it seems to me that the wisest thing to do is to try to protect the $30 million that's already in the program, which is $30 million more than the President requested. I'll yield back my time, Mr. Chairman.
One yields back. What purpose? Oh. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from California. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chairs, the no have it, and the amendment is not agreed
Chairman,
to.
I ask for a recorded vote.
A recorded vote is requested. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from California will be postponed. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, proceedings will now resume on those amendments on which further proceedings were postponed in the following order. The First Amendment by Mr. Dix of Washington, the Second Amendment by Mr. Dix of Washington, the amendments in block by Mr. Lafayette of Ohio, Amendment number 39 by Mr. Pompeo of Kansas, and Amendment number 23 by Ms. Richardson of California. The Chair will reduce to 5 minutes the time for any of the electronic votes in this series after the first 15 minutes. This is a 15-minute vote. The unfinished business is the request for recorded vote on the First Amendment offered by the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Dix, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
First Amendment offered by Mr. Dix of Washington.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device, and this will be a 15-minute vote.
The House this afternoon has continued work on the 2012 Interior Department spending bill. Here, a number of amendment votes, starting with a 15-minute vote on a proposed amendment by Democrat Norm Dix of Washington. Several amendments and more debate ahead. Off the floor today, a lot of discussion about the deficit debt reduction plans proposed by Speaker Boehner and by Harry Reid. The Boehner plan, which last night came before the House Rules Committee, has been revised after the Congressional Budget Office changed the spending outlook, the cuts in spending to $850 billion over 10 years. Well, the Speaker's office has just released a press release on the revised version of the Boehner plan, saying just a few minutes ago that the Congressional Budget Office has released its analysis of the revised Budget Control Act of 2011, and CBO's analysis confirms that the spending cuts are greater than the debt hike, affirming that the House GOP bill meets the critical test House Republicans have said they will insist upon for any bill to raise the nation's debt ceiling. That is from a statement, a press release from Speaker John Boehner's office. We expect the House Rules Committee to meet this evening to consider that legislation, and that will be on the floor on Thursday. We will let you know about coverage, possible coverage of House rules, and when they will meet as soon as we get information. We did just a short while ago speak to a Capitol Hill reporter about where things stand. We did this conversation just before the announcement from the Speaker's office. New Raju, a reporter for Politico. The Speaker Boehner bill on the debt reduction was originally intended to come to the House floor today. Why didn't that happen, and when might it be rescheduled?
Well, the Congressional Budget Office, which of course is the nonpartisan scorekeeper that reviews and gives cost estimates for legislation, said that the Speaker's bill actually fell short of the cost projections, the savings that he had originally hoped for, and that was something that had drawn. He was already having a very hard time winning support from Republicans in the House, conservatives especially, who said that the proposal did not cut spending deep enough, and when that cost estimate came out, it stood virtually no chance of winning enough Republican support to get out of the House. So the Speaker abruptly pushed back the vote. We're expecting it to happen tomorrow, and now the revised bill is expected to move, and the Republican leadership in the House and the Senate has high expectations that it'll pass.
Well, it seems like this extra day, according to news reports, may be helping the Speaker win more GOP converts.
That's right. I mean, there have been intense discussions behind the scenes from the Speaker imploring his lawmakers to get in line behind this bill, saying that this is what we have. This is, trying to explain to them that that the Republicans are winning this debate, that they can take this victory of saying that they're cutting and planning on cutting trillions of dollars along with this debt ceiling increase. And if they think that if they get this out of the House, Senate Democrats will be in a tough position not to pass this bill, and they think that maybe with some modifications on the Senate side, it'll eventually become law, and then all sides can finally get away from this bruising fight.
Well, Harry Reid has said it wouldn't survive in the Senate. What kind of changes might he make? He's got his own plan out there to consider as well.
That's right. The one thing is that the Reid plan and the Boehner plan have a lot of similarities. They both were sort of born out of these discussions, both this past weekend that the bipartisan congressional leadership had, as well as extending back from the Joe Biden talks from several weeks ago. The bills each have a joint committee of Congress that would recommend recommend deeper spending cuts in the future, as well as upfront spending cuts in the totaling in the $3 trillion range. But what it has, the big difference is whether or not to do a short-term debt limit increase, which is what Boehner has. He has a second vote, the second tranche of this debt limit increase contingent on making deeper spending cuts early next year. Democrats have so far said that that is a non-starter. They want one longer-term debt limit increase. They don't want to have this fight again, especially during an election year. So how they resolve the short-term versus long-term issue is an open question. We don't know, but what we do know is that there are a lot of similarities between the two bills, and folks in the Senate think that there's a good chance that a consensus could be formed if the Boehner bill survives this House vote tomorrow.
Well, lastly, your story in Politico focuses on possible signs of market trouble that lawmakers are looking at. Well, that trouble, those signs may be today. The S&P down 500. It's the worst day on the markets for nearly 2 months, according to some. How might that news affect the deliberations on Capitol Hill in the next couple of days?
I think it'll intensify things dramatically. These guys know that this is the biggest factor that is looming. How will the market react? No one knows. The country's never gone into a default like this, and everyone remembers who was here what happened in the TARP vote, the so-called bank bailout back in 2008 when the market had its nearly 800-point drop, which was the largest single-day drop in history. That was a result of the House rejecting that TARP vote. No one wants to go through that again, and when they see some market trouble, I think you're going to see quicker action on the Hill to finally get a deal here.
Manu Raju with Politico. You can read his articles at Politico.com. Thank you for that update.
Thank you.
And just updating our conversation with Manu Raju, just a short while ago, Speaker Boehner's office released a press announcement that the Congressional Budget Office has revised their outlook on the Boehner proposal, which was reworked last night and today. The release from Speaker Boehner's office says CBO has released its analysis of the revised Budget Control Act of 2011, and CBO's analysis confirms that the spending cuts are greater than the debt hike, affirming that the House GOP bill meets the critical test House Republicans have said they will insist upon for any bill to raise the nation's debt ceiling. That from John Boehner's office. We are expecting House Rules Committee to meet this evening and consider that legislation and set debate rules for what's expected to be debate on the House floor tomorrow. Well, it's been a day in Washington of plenty of meetings behind closed doors and briefings in front of television cameras, including Tea Party activists and Republican members of Congress rallying at the Capitol today in support of the legislation passed by the House last week that's called Cut, Cap, and Balance. The Senate tabled that measure, and congressional leaders are looking at new bills to address the debt ceiling and deficit. We're going to show you part of that Tea Party rally from earlier today while this amendment vote to the Interior Spending Bill continues.
Thank you. It only takes a few people to change things, so we've got enough here today to turn things around in the Capitol, and boy, do we have a fight going on. Folks, we need to remember that every generation of Americans have had to fight for their freedom. Some on the battlefield, some on the street corners, some in the halls of Congress. For us, the fight now is about our debt. That is the threat, not a debt ceiling, but our debt. That's what last November was about, to get control of the spending, the borrowing, the debt, and return to a constitutional limited government. And folks, you and people like you all over the country made a huge difference. Some folks that are going to follow me, the senators and congressmen that you sent, came because people took to the streets. They demanded Republicans, conservatives that would stand for what they believe in. A few weeks ago, we didn't seem to be going anywhere with this debt limit debate. And we got together with a number of outside groups, Tea Party groups from around the country. We formed the Cut Cap Balance Pledge website. Hundreds of thousands of Americans have joined us. It's the largest coalition of conservative groups and Tea Party groups that I've seen. And we were able to do something they said we couldn't do, is actually get a bill up in the House and pass a bill that solved our problem, that gave the President the increase in the debt limit, but only if we cut spending today, if we capped it over 10 years, and if we put our country on a path to a balanced budget. This cut, cap, and balance bill passed the House and came to the Senate, and very quickly the American people saw it was something that they wanted. Over 66% of Americans immediately thought cut, cap, and balance was a good idea. So Harry Reid tabled it so we couldn't even have any debate on it. Now we're in a crisis, as we are every year when they want to spend more money. Folks, we've got to hold the line. We've got to stand strong. We can't let down the people who elected us last November. We need to do the fiscally responsible thing, but I'm telling you, if we go past this August 2nd date, raise the debt limit without cutting spending and moving towards a balanced budget, we're not only going to lose our AAA rating, but we're going to move our country towards bankruptcy. We're pleading with Americans everywhere to get involved. The President said call your congressmen and senators. But when you call them, tell them to hold the line. Tell them we've got to balance our budget. We cannot borrow more money. We have to balance our budget. Stand with us. A few people can make a difference. You already have. But now it may be our last chance to turn America around. So let's all stand together. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Senator. What are we going to do? Say it again. We're going to hold the line. And now we'd like to have Senator Mike Lee to come say a few words.
My name is Mike Lee. I'm a senator from the great state of Utah. I'm the youngest member of the Senate. I just turned 40 a few weeks ago. The only bad part about being the youngest senator is you sometimes get carded when you're going in to vote. But I keep my ID with me. But more importantly, I keep with me the principles that got me elected. I was elected because of tens of millions of Americans, including a lot of people from my own home state, have come simultaneously to the conclusion that the federal government has become too big and too expensive. It's become too big and too expensive in part because it has neglected those principles articulated in our 224-year-old founding document that established Congress in the first place and set the ground rules for its operation. You see, our founding fathers had had their own experience with a large, distant national government, one that taxed the people too heavily and regulated them too oppressively. They understood that there is a risk associated with concentrating too much power in a national government. And so they deliberately created a national government with only limited enumerated powers, one in charge of just a few basic things, like national defense, regulating trade between the states and with foreign nations, weights and measures, granting letters of marque and reprisal, you know, that hall pass that allows you to be a pirate in the name of the United States. It did not include the power to tell us where to go to the doctor and how to pay for it. It did not include the power to regulate virtually every aspect of our existence. And if those limited powers, in fact, remain limited, few and defined, as James Madison described them, we would not be in a position where we would have accumulated almost $15 trillion in debt and being asked yet again to raise our debt limit by $2.5 trillion. But alas, we find ourselves in this position. We're spending at this rate. We understand that there are problems on either side of this tightrope walk. If we don't raise the debt limit, some problems will ensue, but the problem that often gets overlooked is that if we raise the debt limit too quickly, too hastily, too reflexively, as we've done every single time in the past, putting in place no permanent structural spending reform, we could face a credit rating problem that could be just as bad as, if not much worse than, the one that we face if we don't raise it at all. That's why I wrote the Cut, Cap, and Balance Act, which just a few days after I introduced that in the Senate, along with my friends Jim DeMint and Rand Paul and a few others who are here today. Thanks for being my friends, by the way. It was introduced by Jason Chaffetz in the House of Representatives, and they passed it. And then something interesting happened. This is not just the best proposal for addressing the debt limit problem. It's the only proposal. It's the only one. We're being attacked by the left for not having the right proposal, but they have yet to submit a single bill to address this issue. Ours is the only show in town. And did they let us have a vote? No. Did they refuse to give us a vote after allowing it to be amended, discussed, and debated? No. No, they didn't, because they couldn't handle it. They couldn't handle it. They couldn't handle the fact that the American people were overwhelmingly in support of the principles underlying cut, cap, and balance. And so they tabled it without any discussion. The Democratic leadership in the Senate tabled it, along with their Democratic members. Then they retreated behind closed doors to try to come up with a pre-cooked deal that they could cram down our throats at the final hour. We call that extortion in some quarters. We call it, at a minimum, very bad policy. It's time to solve the underlying problem. It's time permanently to reform the way Washington, D.C. spends money. That's why I've written an entire book about the need for a balanced budget amendment, a need to permanently change the way Washington spends money. It's called the Freedom Agenda. It will make you weep hot tears of joy. More importantly, the principles that we're talking about today, the principles of the Cut, Cap, and Balance Act, the idea of a balanced budget amendment, are the ideas that we need to cling to, that we need to keep pushing forward in order to save our country from itself, in order to save our country from a Congress that for decades has been burying our children and our grandchildren, both born and unborn, under a mountain of debt, and in the process killing jobs. That has to stop. With your support and with the help of those who support the principles of the Tea Party movement, we can make it stop. We can, and we must, and we will. God bless America. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Again, American Grassroots Coalition and Tea Party Express are proud to put this rally on for the American people. We're not professionals. We're Americans just like you. And we know that your message needs to be heard loud and clear. To what? Hold the line. Now we have a great patriot, a great Marine coming up here. The leader of 60 Plus, Mr. Jim Martin.
At the 60 Plus Association, we say hold the line. When seniors have to live within their means, Congress should have to, too. There was a senior tsunami that hit Capitol Hill in 2010, and about 60 folks are looking for a new line of work. That same tsunami is going to hit Capitol Hill again in 2012. Senior citizens, seniors say cut back on the out-of-control spending, or that tsunami is coming ashore again. Look, I'm from Kentucky, and it is my proud honor to introduce a favorite senator of mine, Senator Rand Paul. Senator Paul.
Thank you. Every day we get closer and closer to a crisis. It's not the debt ceiling, but it's a crisis over debt. We are spending $100,000 a second. We are borrowing $40,000 a second. It is out of control. What proposals do we have on the table? We have the Boehner proposal on the table. It will cut next year $1 billion. We are spending $1 billion an hour virtually. That is insignificant and not meaningful reform. The Boehner proposal will add $7 trillion to the debt over the next 10 years. That is unacceptable and unsustainable. We have to cut spending. Any plan that I support has to balance. These plans never balance. I will only support a plan that balances a budget and, by law, a balanced budget amendment or no debt ceiling. Thank you.
Part of a noontime rally on Capitol Hill and one of several events and briefings that you can find in our video library at cspan.org. There were a number of briefings and other events regarding the debt reduction measures, and that was about noon today. Within the last half hour or so, John Boehner has released a statement from his office on a new estimate from the Congressional Budget Office. The Associated Press writing that analysis shows the revised House Republican plan cuts the deficit by $22 billion in the first year. The AP writes that Boehner said in a statement that the new numbers from the Congressional Budget Office indicate the bill cuts and caps spending by $917 billion over 10 years. That's more than $900 billion increase in the nation's borrowing authority in the legislation. They write that the Speaker is pushing for a vote on the bill on Thursday as rank-and-file conservatives have slowly coalesced behind the legislation. The AP also writes that Senate Democrats are telling Republicans controlling the House that there's no way they'll support a GOP plan to lift the federal debt limit. The development came as every Senate Democrat and 2 independents signed a letter to the House Speaker promising to oppose the GOP plan because it could mean another risk of government default next year and force cuts to programs like Medicare. Well, it's likely that sometime this evening the House Rules Committee will meet to consider the rules for debate on the Boehner proposal. We will keep you posted on whether we are able to cover that, whether that happens tonight, and whether we're able to cover it for you on the C-SPAN networks. Here on the House floor, they're in the midst of a series of 5 amendment votes to the 2012 Interior Department spending bill. This is the 7th 2012 spending bill that the House has considered so far this year. An amendment vote here on Norm Dix's amendment, 4 more to follow this, and then more debate ahead on the House floor.
On this vote, the ayes are 174, the nays are 237, and the amendment is not agreed to. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on the second amendment offered by the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Dix, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Second amendment